How do stories help us make sense of our lives? How does Pinocchio help me become a better person? Stories can be timeless and have the power to connect to the deepest part of us, that shared human part of us. I think it's funny and appropriate that the darkest Disney film also provides the tools on which to navigate the darkness of life. This video aims to make sense of the film on an archetypical and mythological level, inspired by the work of Jordan B Peterson and Joseph Campbell. It's hard to believe that Pinocchio was released in 1940 and was one of the first in a run of classic Disney films. The ability of the artists at the time to tap into such archetypical themes and deep internal human obstacles is incredible. Star Wars, for example, took the understanding of Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces and formed that classic story of good versus evil. But Pinocchio seems to be more of an external manifestation of the human interior, in which the forces of good and evil, truth and dishonesty, naivety and maturity are explored against each other. We open with the song When You Wish Upon a Star, which sets the stage emotionally and also acts as a thematic foundation of the picture. Not to mention the catalyst for change from Geppetto, who's a good man, a carpenter, a man of mastery over his craft as a toy maker. He represents the archetype of the good father, someone who brings a child into the world through his own creation. The noble, selfless, and romantic quality of his wish is what makes him worthy. Not wanting his child to be a slave or be dependent, but by asking for Pinocchio to become a real boy. The film demonstrates the achievement of this act by physically turning Pinocchio from wooden to a real flesh and blood boy. But this reward is deceiving because it's only through the internal development of Pinocchio's character that he earns the right to physically transform. So the true message of the film is grounded in the idea of following your heart in the direction of truth and taking personal responsibility for what you create in the world. Let's start with the symbol of the star. Geppetto aligns himself with the metaphorical manifestation of the highest good he can conceptualize, and wishes upon it like a prayer to God. Down comes the blue fairy, acting as the bridge between the world that we experience and the unknown.
Good Geppetto, you have given so much happiness to others. You deserve to have your wish come true.
She is appropriately female with the ability to create life and grants Geppetto this wish. But the part of the gift that I find interesting is basically upon waking into existence, Pinocchio was met with the burden of a goal, a direction, and a test that he must undertake.
Prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish, and someday you will be a real boy.
A real boy!
And it's at this point that he's assigned a conscience to help him learn right from wrong. But despite being represented through two separate characters, Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio could also be seen as two parts to the same human psyche, having conversations the way that our own conscience lives and communicates inside us. But as honored as Jiminy is to take on this job, his ability to really communicate and be there in the beginning really lets Pinocchio down, and it's not long before we leave the warm and supportive nature of Geppetto's house and we must face the real world. This section of the story finishes off with the celebration of new life, but Geppetto's joyful dance is interrupted by Pinocchio's curiosity with fire. We are brought back into reality when we realize that Pinocchio is still very naive. He has yet to form an accurate model of the world, and we get a small glimpse into the initial attraction of the evil in life that he must navigate. Not to mention foreshadowing the idea that he will return to become the master of fire later in the story. So like any good father, Geppetto must let his son go into the world in order to grow. This is a great point to talk about what Pinocchio really is. He's a puppet, he is a marionette, symbolically meaning that someone else is pulling his strings. He is unable at this age and stage to fully think and act for himself. And with that naivety, he walks blindly into the unknown of the world, and his initial exposure is one that takes advantage of him. He's swayed and distracted by the priorities of others. And where's his conscience, his gateway into that inner voice who's supposed to guide him around such obstacles? Well, he's late on his first day of the job. I really like this detail. It's funny, first of all, and it's clear that Jiminy has a lot to learn individually, but it's also the idea that your conscience doesn't really work right out the gate. especially if you've been overprotected. Pinocchio's over-trusting nature and lack of exposure to the darkness of life gives him no reason for his conscience to really speak up at this moment. He is easily manipulated through the ideas of grandeur and fame and the easy path. This represents a falseness and fake celebrity and no value of integrity, and it's the opposite path of honesty and courage in which Pinocchio must go. As appealing and attractive as it first seems, we see the behind-the-curtain reality that he is used and discarded at the will of an entertainer, a tyrant, Stromboli. He literally becomes the dark puppet master, putting Pinocchio to work, taking advantage of his naivety and stepping in to accept the applause and the money at the end of the show. Our hero is caught off guard by Stromboli's ulterior motive, and he is trapped in this place of physical and psychological chaos. Luckily, the blue fairy is the hope that still remains in the deepest darkness, and not only acts as the catalyst to give Pinocchio life, but also as a mentor figure, sharing advice and tools in which to overcome obstacles. The part I find really interesting here is that she still questions him, because as an omnipresent being, she already knows what happened, right? She knows exactly when to show up, but she still gives Pinocchio a chance to be truthful. And like any child trying to get out of trouble, he wears the guilt of his lies all over his face. And the visual representation of a lie growing is very clever. I mean, that's what happens. You lie, you feel it inside, your conscience knows it, and it gets bigger. Even if you get away with it, you still carry around the invisible weight of that self-created burden. So now he's experienced some of the world and learnt that lying cannot protect him.
No, sir, nothing can stop me now. I'll make good this time.
He reaffirms his determination and optimism by returning home to be a real boy. And it's appropriate that after this first encounter, the Jiminy is back and on high alert. But just like in life, almost immediately after deciding something, that choice is tested. Despite being armed with his new morals, the enemy of life is equally, if not more manipulative, causing him to be taken astray again. But this time, his naivety and lack of ability to choose the right path will be punished. This is where Pinocchio starts to get really dark. Also notice that there is not one central villain. It's more of an antagonist force of darkness and evil of life that Pinocchio encounters in an episodic fashion. The invisible through line is his struggle to keep his internal moral compass clear, which is continually tested against bigger and bigger monsters. Bringing us to the coach driver, who is the pure personification of evil, perhaps the devil himself, cleverly animated by Disney as so. Now his plans frighten the other two, who are merely petty criminals by comparison, and he takes a group of boys to Pleasure Island, with the perceived perspective of limitless freedom, allowing any and all impulses and immediate gratification, to live in a way that ignores consequences and fulfill the indulgences of self-destruction. This is to turn a blind eye on the inevitable judgment that must be faced. A major low point is the scene where Jiminy turns his back on his job as conscience. Pinocchio knows what is wrong, and he willingly engages in the act, and it's when him and his conscience diverge. If you ever visit any dark place in your life, you'll know that you don't return the same. Those tragic events leave scars, whether physical or emotional, which are represented here again by a physical change in appearance. It seems to me like the amount of transformation is proportionate to the distance traveled away from the good path, which is why Pinocchio is only partially changed. His descent is a mixture of choice and naivety. But Lampwick is clearly worse and is quickly lost, turned into a donkey, which is the symbol of stupidity in Italy, where the original story was written. But I'm amazed at the level of brutality and darkness that Disney go to show this section of the film. It's shockingly spectacular, and it's at this point that Pinocchio really becomes an active hero. Once he makes the choice to change and escape, he is rewarded by his conscience coming back. But the coach driver was right when he said,
"They never come back as boys."
in the sense that their innocence has been violated and trapped forever as donkeys, or you consciously choose to turn yourself around and embark on the journey of the classic hero. Since Pinocchio sunk so low, it's an uphill battle of suffering to the finale for our hero's redemption.
So what's happened there? Well, many things at multiple levels of reality simultaneously, and that's the characteristic of an archetypal story. So on one level, Pinocchio's too old to go home. He can't go home to his father because in some sense he's already transcended his father. So there are things, for example, that your father can't help you with, and the reason for that is that he doesn't know any more about the situation than you do, and he can't. And so that's where his knowledge limits out. So that would be sort of on the personal level. And then on the transpersonal level, which would be the deeper archetypal level, what's happening to Pinocchio is exactly what Nietzsche described at the end of the 19th century. Because remember that Geppetto is his creator, and now he's dead, he's gone. And so Pinocchio is bereft of placement, so to speak. His soul has been corrupted, and he doesn't know what to do about it. And when he returns to his family home, or when he returns to his tradition, what he finds is nothing. Okay, so then what happens? Well, this dove comes along that's sort of golden and glowing and drops a note right in front of him. The star from which the dove comes is a representation of the blue fairy. And the blue fairy is the positive element of the unknown in the Pinocchio movie. And so what it basically is saying that when you're despairing because your father has died and your tradition has nothing to offer, that the positive element of the unknown may provide you with a message about where to go if you pay enough attention. That would be an intuition.
This brings us to one of the most emotionally charged moments in the film. Pinocchio decides to do what is right and commit to saving his father from the belly of the whale and steps off into the deep, dark ocean. This is the approach to the innermost cave, and a sort of initiation for Pinocchio as he chooses to step off and fall into the complete unknown. The image and feeling of falling is so accurate, as it's a leap of faith, and after that step, the outcome is completely out of his control, marking the beginning of his move away from boyhood into maturity.
A hero properly is someone who has given his life to something bigger than himself, or other than himself. When you go to your death that way as a god, you are going to your eternal life. What's sad about that? Let's make it great.
Now in a search for Monstro, his name alone scares off other fish, as thou who shall not be named terrifies and represents the worst unspeakable evil. But thematically, being inside the belly of a whale is a common mythological motif. It symbolizes a cocoon of growth, a womb for rebirth, but also the ultimate depth of darkness our characters must face. While inside, Geppetto has resigned to his inevitable fate and isn't equipped to escape. His perceived solution is concentrating his energy on gathering food, but just like Pinocchio needed guidance from his father in the beginning, the father now needs the new perspective of the son, who rightfully recognizes the problem is not to feed themselves, but to escape. Returning to the element of fire, Pinocchio now channels what was once bad with his intention. By burning the ship, he wakes the whale and transforms it into a fire-breathing dragon.
Pinocchio, swim for shore! Swim for shore!
During the final battle, Pinocchio makes the choice not to save himself, but to go back, risking further danger in order to save his father, ultimately sacrificing himself in an act of bravery, courage, and selflessness. It's this action that completes his journey. Even after his tragic death, Pinocchio is symbolically reborn, resurrected by the blue fairy as a real boy, allowing an old part of himself to die in order for a new version of himself to live. Mirroring the journey of a butterfly leaving the cocoon, his form has changed, but only as a result of the process of growth inside the darkness. So how does the story help me make sense of life, and how does it help me become a better person? Despite the chaos of life, anyone can become an authentic and self-actualized person by embodying truth, ownership, and responsibility for what they create in life, which usually involves sacrificing the easier paths and requires the strengthening of the individual. Disney's Pinocchio is just one of many stories that tap into the mythological, and it's a major reason for the film's timeless appeal and its continual relevance as a powerful and human story. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video on a classic Disney film. Pinocchio was a huge movie for me growing up, but my reintroduction to the film really came through the lectures of Jordan B Peterson. His future authoring program really helped me be clear and specific about things I wanted to create in life. This video, for example, is the fulfillment of one of those ideas. If you'd be interested in checking it out and planning your ideal future, I'll leave it in the description below. There's 2 ways you can support this channel if you are interested. The first is by subscribing. That's the thing that helps me the most. The second is through Patreon. I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreons for the support making these video essays and podcasts, and a huge thanks to you for watching. See you in the next video.